On a quiet day in March 2003, in the serene seaside town of Pacifica, California, a harrowing story of love and betrayal would forever change the lives of one family. This tragic case centers on the untimely death of Marshall Tucker, a highly skilled software engineer and devoted family man who lost his life within the walls of his own home. As we unravel this account, we will delve into the darker themes of obsession and fantasy that precipitated this devastating event. Marshall Tucker was a 47-year-old resident of Pacifica and a talented software engineer, well regarded for his innovative thinking and dedication to his work. His professional life was marked by a tireless work ethic and an impressive drive, which earned him respect and admiration. Beyond his career, Marshall led a fulfilling personal life. He was married to his wife, Lainey, with whom he shared two children, 14-year-old Activia and 10-year-old Marlboro. The Tucker family resided in a charming home near the beach, where Marshall, deeply devoted to his family, prioritized spending quality time with them. On weekends, Marshall would often take his family hiking to scenic locations like Maury Point and the Sweeney Ridge Trail, where he could pursue his passion for photography, particularly of the ocean and sunsets. Marshall was an alumnus of Stanford University, where he formed a lasting friendship with Nate Harrison. The two shared a career at the same tech company, developing software solutions for large-scale businesses. Marshall enjoyed reading about technology and science and frequently watched shows such as The X-Files and Star Trek Voyager with his children. Friends and colleagues admired Marshall's intelligence, kindness, and willingness to help others. In the days leading up to his death, Marshall was deeply engaged in an ambitious project that he believed would redefine computer usage, eager to present it to company leaders. Yet he still found time to plan a family outing to Point Reyes National Seashore and help Activia with her marine life science project, while also building a model rocket with Marlboro. He harbored dreams of starting his own tech company and envisioned traveling with his family to iconic destinations like Yellowstone National Park and the Grand Canyon. Marshall Tucker was a man whose life was rich with dreams, love, and devotion. But on March 23, 2003, all of that would be irrevocably changed. Pacifica was shrouded in clouds that morning, with a cool breeze blowing in from the coast. Around 8 a.m., Activia awoke and made her way downstairs, expecting to see her father preparing for their planned hike. Instead, she encountered a scene that would haunt her forever. The living room was in chaos, with overturned furniture and scattered belongings. In the center of the room lay her father, Marshall, motionless, with blood pooling around his head. A horrified Activia screamed for her mother. Lainey rushed in, gasping at the sight of her husband before shakily calling 911. She informed the operator of a suspected break-in and assault on her husband. Police arrived within 10 minutes, with Officer Mark Stevens among the first on the scene. He found Lainey comforting her distraught daughter and asked them to step outside while he conducted a preliminary search. Upon inspection, Officer Stevens noted inconsistencies in the scene. Although the room appeared ransacked, valuables such as the television and Lainey's jewelry remained untouched. Near the fireplace, detectives discovered Marshall's body, alongside a blood-stained, heavy candlestick, evidently the weapon used in the attack. Detectives meticulously documented the scene, dusting for fingerprints and gathering evidence in hopes of identifying the perpetrator. Meanwhile, outside, Lainey and Activia clung to each other, struggling to comprehend the traumatic event. Lainey tried to remain composed for her daughter, but her grief was palpable. Activia, distraught and tearful, kept asking why someone would harm her father. The discovery of Marshall Tucker's body marked the beginning of a complex and tragic investigation, leaving the once peaceful Tucker family plunged into grief and uncertainty, and signaling the start of an arduous search for answers. Upon their arrival at the Tucker residence on March 23, 2003, the police promptly secured the scene. Leading the investigation were detectives Laura Grant and Michael Chua, both seasoned professionals with established reputations. Detective Grant, a 45-year-old with short brown hair and a no-nonsense approach, worked alongside Detective Chua, a 50-year-old known for his tall, lean build and sharp instincts. The living room was in disarray, with overturned furniture, open drawers, and scattered items, suggesting an apparent robbery. However, several valuable possessions, including a flat-screen television, Lainey's expensive jewelry, and a newly purchased laptop, remained untouched, arousing the detectives' suspicions. Marshall's body lay near the fireplace, exhibiting severe head injuries, and an ornate candlestick, stained with blood and seemingly taken from the mantel, was found nearby, indicating it had been used as the weapon. The extent of Marshall's head injuries pointed to a violent struggle. Detectives Grant and Chua meticulously examined the crime scene, capturing photographs and collecting evidence, including fingerprints from the candlestick and other surfaces. Forensic specialists, dressed in protective suits to avoid contaminating the scene, gathered blood samples and fibers for further analysis. Meanwhile, detectives Grant and Chua interviewed Lainey and Activia outside. Lainey, still visibly shaken, struggled to recount the events, explaining that she had been asleep and had not heard anything unusual. Activia, who had been the first to discover her father, was too distraught to provide substantial detail. Officer Stevens, the first to arrive on the scene, helped to calm them and took their initial statements. Detective Grant noted that there were no signs of forced entry. The door was intact, and the windows were undamaged, suggesting the killer either possessed a key or had been let in by someone inside. This led the detectives to consider that Marshall's killer might have been someone he knew. Using specialized lighting, the team searched for hidden evidence, including possible footprints and traces of blood. They also examined Marshall's and Lainey's phones for recent calls or messages. Throughout the day, the detectives worked methodically, aware that each detail could prove crucial to solving the case. Marshall Tucker's death sent shockwaves through the quiet community of Pacifica, leaving the detectives with the challenging task of uncovering the truth to seek justice for him and his grieving family. Attention soon turned to Lainey Tucker, Marshall's wife, as a primary person of interest. Lainey, 41, was known as a creative yet reserved individual with a deep passion for writing adult fiction, often centered on intense and violent themes. Over the past year, she had become deeply immersed in the fantasy world of her creation. Recently, her work focused on a dark romantic affair, and friends had noticed a tendency for her to blur the line between her fiction and reality. This behavior raised concerns for the detectives, who observed her detached demeanor and occasional confusion about what was real. Detectives Grant and Chua questioned Lainey the day following Marshall's death, inquiring about her relationship with her husband and her whereabouts on the night of the murder. Lainey claimed she had been asleep and had not heard anything unusual. She expressed her love for Marshall, stating she could not imagine why anyone would wish to harm him. The detectives noted her nervous behavior, as she frequently fidgeted and avoided eye contact. They probed into her writing, questioning whether she felt her stories might sometimes blur with reality. Lainey asserted that her writing was simply a hobby and bore no connection to Marshall's death. However, upon further investigation, the detectives learned that she had displayed increasingly unusual behavior during recent writing group meetings. Friends noted that Lainey frequently spoke of her story with an intense focus on the tragic aspects of love, leading some to wonder if she had become excessively absorbed in her fiction. During her interrogation, Lainey's responses were often vague and evasive, and she was unable to provide a solid alibi for the night of the murder, claiming only that she had taken sleeping pills and retired to bed early. When detectives inquired if anyone else held a key to the Tucker residence, Lainey responded that only she and Marshall possessed one, further intensifying their suspicions. Examining Lainey's phone records, the detectives discovered numerous text messages and emails indicating her growing fixation on her story. In one message to a friend, she confessed, "Sometimes I feel like my characters are more real than my own life." This statement suggested to the detectives that Lainey might have blurred the boundaries between her fantasy and reality. Although she remained relatively composed during questioning, her visible exhaustion and stress made it challenging to ascertain whether she was concealing something or simply overwhelmed by recent events. As a result, the detectives decided to keep her under observation while continuing their investigation to gather further evidence either to confirm her involvement or exonerate her. Lainey Tucker's unusual behavior and profound immersion in her fictional worlds made her a primary suspect in Marshall's murder. However, the detectives recognized that more concrete evidence was necessary to confirm her potential role. The second individual under suspicion was Nate Harrison, Marshall's longtime friend. Nate, 39, was also a colleague at the same technology company, known for his sociable and friendly demeanor. A frequent guest at the Tucker home, Nate was considered an extended part of the family. Sharing Marshall's enthusiasm for technology and innovation, The two had been close friends since their time together at Stanford University. Detectives Grant and Chua brought Nate in for questioning to better understand his relationship with both Marshall and Laney. Though initially surprised at being a suspect, Nate was cooperative throughout the process, recounting his long-standing friendship with Marshall and their numerous collaborative projects. He explained that he had been working at home on a software project the night of the murder and provided a colleague's contact to verify that he had indeed been online and working late that evening. Visibly distressed over Marshall's death, Nate expressed genuine shock that someone would kill his best friend. The detectives then turned their questioning toward his relationship with Laney. Nate admitted that he and Laney had become closer over the past year, especially as she struggled with challenges in her writing and mental health. He mentioned that he often supported her in maintaining a clear distinction between her real life and her fictional world. When asked if he harbored romantic feelings for Laney, Nate hesitated before eventually acknowledging that he did. However, he quickly added that he had never acted upon these feelings, insisting that his loyalty had always been with Marshall. The detectives found this admission noteworthy, considering whether Nate's feelings for Laney might have provided a motive. Upon further examination of Nate's phone records and online activity, the detectives found numerous messages sent to Laney, wherein he encouraged her writing and offered emotional support. Although these messages were not overtly suspicious, the sheer volume raised certain questions. Nate remained calm for the most part during his interrogation, though he exhibited noticeable anxiety whenever the conversation shifted to Laney. He appeared deeply affected by Marshall's loss and concerned for Laney's well-being, but the detectives could not determine whether this stemmed solely from grief or something more. Nate's close ties to both Marshall and Laney positioned him as a complex figure in the investigation, and further evidence would be required to assess whether his feelings for Laney related to Marshall's murder, or if he was merely a supportive friend caught in a tragic situation. On March 27, 2003, 4 days after Marshall Tucker's murder, a cold and rainy day in Pacifica, detectives Grant and Chua received a call about newly discovered evidence. An officer examining Laney's phone and computer files had found a series of messages between Laney and Nate that differed from the previous exchanges. These messages were notably personal and hinted at troubling sentiments. In one message, Laney had written to Nate, "I can't stop thinking about my story." This message unsettled the detectives, suggesting that Laney's sense of reality had become compromised and that she may have been considering extreme actions. This new evidence raised concerns regarding her mental state and its possible link to Marshall's death. Another message from Nate to Laney read, "If this is what you think has to happen, I'm here for you. Just be careful." This statement indicated that Nate might have been aware of Laney's distressing thoughts and was offering support, though it also prompted questions about his awareness and potential involvement in her mindset during this period. Detectives Grant and Chua returned to Laney's home to confront her about the newly uncovered messages. Laney, appearing exhausted and agitated, consented to speak with them. Presented with the messages, she broke down in tears and admitted to feeling confused about reality. She explained that her immersion in her fictional world had become overwhelming, leading to a blurring of the lines between fiction and her everyday life. As Laney spoke, Detective Chua received a call from the forensic team, who had discovered Nate's fingerprints on the murder weapon, the candlestick. This critical piece of evidence indicated that Nate had recently been in the Tucker home and had handled the weapon. Detectives Grant and Chua, undeterred by the heavy rain, made their way to Nate's residence to confront him. The somber weather mirrored the gravity of the investigation as they presented Nate with the incriminating messages and fingerprint evidence. Although Nate claimed his fingerprints might have been left during one of his frequent visits to the Tuckers' home, the detectives were skeptical. Despite his insistence that he had only sought to support Laney, the weight of the evidence, including the fingerprint match and the troubling messages, compelled the detectives to take Nate into custody under suspicion of his involvement in Marshall's murder. This new development added complexity to the case, raising the possibility that both Nate and Laney could be implicated in the crime. The detectives intensified their efforts, determined to gather any remaining evidence needed to uncover the full truth behind Marshall's death. As the investigation expanded, Anna Louise Reed, a 24-year-old social worker and neighbor to the Tuckers, emerged as a potential third suspect. Known for her compassionate nature, Anna Louise had often offered emotional support to Lainey during difficult times. Rumors of a romantic relationship between her and Lainey added further complexity to her involvement. When questioned, Anna Louise described her close friendship with Lainey, explaining that her relationship with Marshall had always been friendly and respectful. She claimed to have been at home the night of the murder, reading and watching television, and insisted she hadn't heard anything unusual. Detectives Grant and Chua reviewed Anna Louise's phone records, finding numerous exchanges with Lainey that were largely mundane but included some messages expressing Lainey's deep emotional struggles. Despite Anna Louise's calm demeanor and prompt answers, the detectives found her continued concern for Lainey noteworthy, and her proximity to the Tuckers warranted ongoing surveillance. They decided to monitor her closely as they continued their investigation, aware that her involvement could still prove significant. Anna Louise's intimate connection with Lainey made her a central figure, prompting the detectives to pursue every lead to confirm or dismiss her role in the case. By March 30, 2003, a week after Marshall Tucker's murder, the weather in Pacifica had cleared, yet the search for truth remained pressing as the detectives moved forward with renewed focus. Upon receiving a crucial lead from the forensic team, detectives Grant and Chua were informed of a series of incriminating messages found on Lainey Tucker's phone, which directly linked Nate Harrison to the crime. The messages revealed that Nate had both encouraged and was fully aware of Lainey's plan to murder her husband, Marshall. It was now undeniable that Lainey Tucker, 41, was the orchestrator of the heinous act. Her fixation on a dark, delusional fantasy world had led her to believe that the murder of Marshall was essential to immortalize the love story she had constructed in her mind. Lainey's mental state had deteriorated to the point where she confused fiction with reality, ultimately convincing herself that Marshall's death would validate her fantasies. This delusion drove her to choose an ornate candlestick from their living room as the murder weapon, a piece that had once symbolized a connection to her imagined world. As the investigation progressed, detectives Grant and Chua began to realize that Nate Harrison, 39, was not just a passive figure in this twisted narrative, but a complicit participant. Nate, who had long secretly harbored feelings for Lainey, had chosen not to intervene when the plan was set into motion. In fact, he manipulated the situation, ensuring the crime went forward. His selfish desire to be with Lainey blinded him to the severity of their actions, and he believed that by eliminating Marshall, he would have the opportunity to finally be with her. Nate had played a crucial role in providing Lainey with the means to commit the crime, and had even helped stage the scene to look like a botched burglary, all in the hopes that it would remove Marshall from the equation permanently. With the new evidence in hand, the detectives decided to confront Nate. On the evening of March 30, 2003, the sky was clear, and the air was cool and crisp as they drove to his home. They arrived, prepared to deliver the shocking news that would change his life forever. When Nate answered the door, he was taken aback by their presence. Detective Grant informed him that they needed to discuss new developments in the case. Inside, the detectives presented Nate with the incriminating messages between him and Lainey, along with the forensic evidence tying him to the crime. His reaction was one of disbelief as his face drained of color, and he attempted to deny any involvement. However, the evidence was overwhelming, and there was no room for further denials. Detective Chua calmly arrested him, his demeanor calm but firm as the handcuffs clicked shut around Nate's wrists. Nate appeared stunned and defeated, the weight of his betrayal now dawning on him. Meanwhile, Lainey, unaware of the investigation's progress, was arrested at her home without resistance. She seemed almost relieved when the detectives informed her that they knew the full extent of the events. In a state of emotional collapse, Lainey confessed that she had truly believed Marshall's death was necessary to solidify their tragic love story. She had convinced herself that the killing would serve as the final, irreversible act that would bind her and Nate together beyond the confines of reality. The admission was both chilling and heartbreaking, as it highlighted just how far gone her grip on reality had become. The arrests of Lainey and Nate rocked the Pacifica community, especially Marshall's family. They had trusted Lainey and Nate, never imagining that the two people closest to Marshall could betray him in such a horrific manner. Marshall's family, his parents, siblings, and children were devastated by the loss, and the shock of their betrayal only deepened the pain. Despite the arrests providing a sense of closure to some, the grief was overwhelming. The family struggled to comprehend how they could have been deceived for so long. It was a deep wound that would take years, if not a lifetime, to heal. Yet, amidst the sorrow, there was a recognition that justice was being served, though it hardly alleviated the emotional toll. The trial, which began on June 15, 2003, was a highly publicized event. The Pacifica community followed the proceedings with intense interest, as the courtroom was filled with reporters from local news outlets such as KTVU and the Pacifica Tribune. The media attention reflected the deep public interest in the case, as residents of the town sought answers for the tragedy that had shaken their community to its core. The prosecutor, Samantha Klein, 45, known for her tenacity and sharp legal mind, presented a compelling case to the jury. She argued that Laney's delusional fantasies had driven her to murder her husband, and that Nate, who had been aware of and complicit in the crime, had acted out of selfish desire. Klein's team showed how Nate had manipulated Laney's fragile state of mind to serve his interests, further painting him as a co-conspirator in the murder. On the defense side was Robert Hayes, 50, a seasoned attorney with a reputation for remaining calm under pressure and employing sharp legal strategy. Hayes argued that Laney's mental instability had rendered her incapable of fully understanding the consequences of her actions. He claimed that while Nate was undoubtedly close to Laney, his involvement in the crime had been limited to his misguided attempts to help her, not to conspire with her. Hayes painted Nate as a well-meaning but ultimately weak and confused individual who had fallen prey to Laney's manipulations, rather than an active participant in her plans. Throughout the trial, Marshall's family was present every day, including his grieving parents, siblings, and children. Their pain was palpable as they listened to the details of Laney's erratic behavior and Nate's concealed feelings for her. The emotional strain was evident, and each witness's testimony seemed to reopen old wounds. The betrayal of Laney and Nate was a heavy burden for them to bear, and the courtroom became a battleground where the truth about their loved one's death was fought over. After weeks of emotional testimony, legal arguments, and examination of evidence, the jury deliberated for 2 full days before returning with their verdict. On July 1, 2003, the jury found Laney Tucker guilty of first-degree murder, while Nate Harrison was convicted as an accessory to the crime. Judge Evelyn Carter, 55, presided over the sentencing. In a somber moment, she delivered the sentences. Laney Tucker was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Nate Harrison received a 25-year sentence for his role in the crime. The sentences were a stark reminder of the gravity of their actions and the profound impact on Marshall's family and the Pacifica community. While some found solace in the fact that justice had been served, it was clear that the scars left by the crime would never fully heal. Marshall's family, despite the outcome of the trial, continued to grapple with the loss of their beloved husband, father, and friend. The case and its aftermath left an indelible mark on the Pacifica community. Marshall's family faced the challenge of moving forward, but it was not without difficulty. Laney, now serving her life sentence, was transferred to the California Institution for Women, where she received psychiatric treatment for her mental health issues. In prison, she spent her time writing and attending therapy sessions, expressing deep remorse for her actions. She acknowledged the irreversible damage she had caused but seemed to understand that her apologies could never undo the harm done. Nate Harrison, who was sentenced to 25 years in prison, was sent to San Quentin State Prison. His family, unable to reconcile with his role in the crime, distanced themselves from him, leaving him to confront the consequences of his actions alone. In prison, Nate attempted to find redemption through reflection, engaging in rehabilitation programs and counseling, and seeking to understand the depth of his mistakes. Every year on the anniversary of Marshall's death, the Pacifica community came together for a memorial. Friends, family, and colleagues gathered to honor Marshall's memory, a testament to the town's resilience in the face of such an immense tragedy. As time passed, life in Pacifica slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the memory of Marshall Tucker and the lessons learned from his tragic death remained etched in the minds of those who lived there. The case served as a poignant reminder of the dangers of unchecked delusions and the destructive consequences that can arise when reality and fantasy collide. United by their grief, the community became stronger, more aware, and more supportive, with a renewed commitment to mental health awareness and prevention. The case of Marshall Tucker will forever stand as a sobering example of the perilous consequences that can unfold when fantasy overtakes reality, and the deep and lasting impact of such a tragedy on those left behind. It was a story of love, betrayal, and justice in a small coastal town, one that would continue to haunt the collective memory of Pacifica for years to come. Stay glued to this channel, share your thoughts in the comment section, like and subscribe to this channel. Thank you.